Welcome everyone to ASNR Neuroradiology webinar series, Industry Innovates, hosted by Subtle Medical. Today we have Innovations in Neuroimaging, a discussion about AI, operational excellence, and we're going to get a sneak peek about what's on the horizon at Subtle Medical. I'm Wendy Gibbs from the Barrow Neurological Institute, and I'm very happy to introduce our two speakers today, Dr. Greg Zacharczyk, who's a professor of radiology and neuroradiologist at Stanford University, did his training at Stanford, at Harvard, all these great places. Currently, he is the acting president of the American Society of Functional Neuroradiology, and many other things. And we also have Dr. Ajit Shakaranarayanan, who is the chief product officer at Subtle. And he also has a prestigious education. Before he came to Subtle, he was at GE for many years. In today's webinar, we're going to have about 40 minutes of discussion, and we're going to leave the last few minutes for some live Q&A. So feel free to submit questions through the webinar on the Q&A box as we go, and we'll address them at the end. All right, so we'll get started. We were all at ASNR last month. So Ajit and Greg, tell me what stood out to you in terms of things that were new and innovative trends in neuroimaging.
I'll start off with that. Thanks, Wendy, for the kind introduction, and welcome everybody. We were at ASNR, and it was a great, a meeting for at least, especially for me, to actually kind of be together after a long time. And there are a couple of trends which I saw. Actually, not a trend basically, but some of the highlights which I actually noticed. One of them was that the AI is still at the front and center of radiology, especially neuroradiology, whether it is on the diagnostic space, whether it is on the image, improving image efficiency, productivity, and things like that, basically. So that is one of the points I saw. A lot of good companies actually showing really good stuff there. A lot of good talks around how AI is being used clinically in some of these areas. The second aspect which I saw there was a lot of discussion around was the contrast shortage. Obviously, I think it is in the CT space, the iodine contrast, but it actually showed a glimpse of what happens if such a shortage actually comes to being, how the operations of the imaging centers change and how people are thinking about changing those operations, basically. So it was really an eye-opener for me. We have a lot of good products around dose reduction, around imaging efficiency, which we'll be talking about. And a lot of these, trends or, highlights really hit that point for me.
Yeah, from my perspective, it was really great to see everyone in person at ASNR again. And the one thing that I saw a lot of people talking about were the challenges with hiring. And this wasn't just radiologists. Every section seemed to have open positions for neuroradiologists, but I also heard a lot of stories about being able to retain staff and grow your practice in that setting. So that was really impressive, and I think it's part of the rebound from COVID that we've seen. Along with that, one of the things that becomes problematic is the ability to stay on time and to keep patients happy. So I think that's really one of the critical things that people are trying to address. A lot of practices are expanding, academic sites are expanding into community areas. And the real question is, how do we make these satellite sites as good as the local sites? And then finally, the last thing that struck me both from AUR as well as from ASNR was this new focus on environmental sustainability in radiology. I've never really seen people focus on that, but there was a lot of discussion about the carbon footprint of our scanners, how we can be responsible stewards of the environment as we continue to provide great patient care. So those were the real things that caught my eye at the meeting.
Yeah, that was really interesting. The environmental sustainability, that was something I've never heard discussed before. That was a really interesting new discussion. That's a good point. Great, but let's go back for a second. I've known about Subtle for a long time, but I know a lot of people watching this webinar, they've probably heard of Subtle, but they don't know the background. You've been around for a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about the history for those who want to know more about the company?
Sure, Wendy. The company started in my laboratory at Stanford. I was working with a very smart PhD student, Enhao Gong, and he was my graduate student. In about 2017, we started to get really interested in the trends in AI for diagnosis. But what we realized was that AI could be used for other applications, in particular, not just for diagnostics, not just for predicting what was on an image. It could actually be tremendously useful to predict images from other images. And this is kind of, an outgrowth of reconstruction of MR images. And, we were one of the first groups in 2017 to get into this space. I still remember the ASNR meeting in Hawaii where there were 10 abstracts on this topic. And then the next year, there were about 1,000. So it was a very exciting time. And as part of that, we realized that there were lots of applications that were potentially out there once you could use this new technology to predict images from images. And that it was very practical, that there was a real need to improve things like imaging efficiency and image quality over time. And so we came up with a list of 40 good applications immediately. Of course, we couldn't work on all of them. Other people have over the years. But we thought that it really made sense to develop this in a commercial way such that we could get these kinds of advances out to the wider radiology community as quickly as possible. So as part of that, we started the company in 2018. And Enhao became the CEO once he finished with his PhD. And he's really built a very strong team that has been able to translate a lot of these things. We think that, most of the work is done when you've written the paper in academia, but in fact, it turns out that, a lot of the work has to be done because, in academia, you're always concerned about what's the best image you can produce for a paper. Once you start thinking about using this in real life, what you're really worried about is what's the worst image you're going to produce. So we learned a lot during that journey. We engaged with the FDA and brought 2 products, one around MRI and one around PET, which we'll talk about a little later, to the market, both in the US and in Europe, that really addresses these issues that surround time savings and dose reduction. And it was always very exciting to me because unlike a lot of companies, I felt that a lot of the prevailing trends were in the right direction for this company. We could really address, what's traditionally known as the triple aim of healthcare, which is to improve the health of populations, to lower the cost of care, and to improve the patient experience. And you're seeing on the screen right now some of the 2 FDA cleared products in the space of PET and MRI. And we'll be talking a little bit about them and showing you a few more examples as we go along. But basically, they are using convolutional neural networks to enhance the quality of these images such that you can acquire them either at lower dose or often in shorter time periods. And that's really beneficial to, not just the imaging organizations that are running, because it allows you to be much more efficient with your medical devices, but also for the patients, because the patients really don't want to be in the scanner any longer than they have to be. I want to emphasize a very important part of the company was the idea that we should be vendor agnostic. I think as a clinical radiologist, one of the things that you notice very quickly is that each of the major vendors have their own ecosystem. And that can be very challenging when you're trying to provide patient care. So we thought that, rather than develop this closely with one particular scanner type in mind, it should be vendor agnostic because people typically have more than one vendor in their institution. And this slide kind of demonstrates the basic idea of how the system works. Basically, very little changes for the technologist on the left or the radiologist on the far right. The idea is that you just run an enhanced or improved protocol, either faster or lower dose. Those images are just then sent not to PACS as they normally would, but to a small virtual machine that does the processing to improve the quality based on our convolutional neural network algorithm. And then these images are quickly transferred into the PACS and read by the radiologist just in the same way. So it's really something that we've been able to set up at sites in about a half an hour once we can get IT's attention. And really, once it's in place, you really don't have to do very much in terms of ongoing concerns. It really should be invisible to the radiologists and the technologists. So, here's a little bit about the benefits for everyone. For the patients, of course, we want to improve comfort. Nobody should be in a scanner longer than they have to be. People can stay on time. Nobody likes to be delayed and stuck at the imaging center. For radiologists, I think that by getting shorter scans, they have scans that have fewer motion artifacts, which definitely improves the quality. And certainly, once word gets out that scanning is shorter, patients, are very likely to return to your organization. And then finally, from the organizational standpoint, I think what this allows you to do really is use this very expensive, these expensive pieces of hardware most efficiently by making them available to the most number of people. And as part of that, being able to increase revenue and potentially, hire more radiologists to actually do the work to read these. And then finally, if anyone out there has ever, tried to put in a new scanner recently, it takes a long time. You're down for multiple months. Those patients end up going elsewhere. You really don't know if they're ever going to come back to your facility. So this really allows you to incrementally build capacity at your site rather than have these large quantum and disruptive leaps. And beyond that, you can think about this for your technologists. They already know how to use the existing scanners. You don't have to hire more people. You don't have to have them cover the weekends. I think it keeps them much more happy. So, there are benefits all around. These are just a few of them. We've heard others from some of the sites that have used them, but this is basically the idea behind the company.
Yeah, that's so beneficial because the few places I've worked, there's getting a new scanner is not an option. That's all really, really helpful. So that's all been the goal and the benefits from the beginning, but you've done a lot in a very short amount of time since then. So maybe we can hear a little bit about what's been going on since 2017, since you started.
Well, one of the things I would say is that the team has been very busy building these tools, but we've been very lucky to partner with great groups around the country and around the world that have evaluated these independently. And these are just some of the examples of the peer-reviewed publications that have come out of this work that can inspire confidence in the image quality and the value of the work. I'd like to highlight some of these works. When we talk about AI, I think it's always really important not to look at just maybe single images or case series, but to think about multi-center studies, externally validated studies, and things like that. So, if you've ever been in this situation, people have asked you to, read multiple studies and compare image quality and image effectiveness. How time-consuming and challenging it is. So I really thank the clinicians that have taken it upon themselves and been excited about this technology and published and documented the usefulness of these products. And these are just some of the applications here, both in MRI as well as in PET. And I think on the next slide, we have a few other articles that have been written by some of our colleagues, often in Europe, who have been very interested, particularly in dose reduction for PET, and have really built out, not just the academic demonstration of quality, but in fact have even looked into issues of, what is the business case for this type of technology. So we're quite indebted to these people, and we continue to really emphasize within the company that it is important to partner with great institutions and great people, and to publish what we've done to document and inspire confidence in these solutions.
Yeah, and Greg, one of the things what that has led to is commercially we have been actually really busy because as we have published in various different journals with different partners, it has actually led to, at least from my perspective and from the company's perspective, a more confidence in all these different products which we have in the market. So if you look at this slide, it shows all our, an example of our different partners, not only big imaging center chains, but also the academic hospitals like Mount Sinai and Stanford, pediatric hospitals, where some of these value propositions, which Greg actually mentioned, really works. Basically, St. Jude's, Sick Kids, they're all using our products in their own setting, and you can actually see some of the metrics which is shown there. We are actually kind of installed in more than 200 sites globally. We have saved about 1 million minutes basically in all these different sites. It's a real good satisfaction that we are actually providing a really useful solution to some of these centers. And as Greg mentioned, the peer-reviewed publications is extremely important to drive this kind of a growth, basically, for us, we believe. And as Greg said, we have actually kept emphasizing within the company to actually not only develop good and new products, but also develop clinical evidence around that, because it actually drives acceptance and adoption.
Yeah, I'll just say that real quick. I've said this to Greg and you before, that's something that really appealed to me about Subtle from the beginning, is all of your, your scientific evidence that you are publishing. And that's why I trust Subtle. So I think that is a vital part. So why don't you tell us a little bit now about SubtleMR?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So SubtleMR is our second product, which we actually commercialized. It's been in the market for about 2 years now. And what it does is it performs essentially image enhancement by using either denoising, removing noise from the image intelligently, or increasing the sharpness of the image. Both of them towards improving the scan times and making them optimal. SubtleMR, from a feature perspective, we consider it as a virtual upgrade to the entire MR fleet, not one scanner or few scanners, but the entire MR fleet. And as Greg actually mentioned before, I want to emphasize, we went with a technology which actually allows us to be really vendor agnostic. And that is extremely important because it actually helps an institution as a whole rather than as a part. The other features for this particular product is that it is actually applicable. It is generalizable across different field strengths. We have actually have training data sets from the very low field strengths, 0.3 Tesla, to the highest field strength in the market, 3 Tesla. It also works with all the major imaging contrasts. So people don't have to pick and choose. It actually can be applied to your T1s, your regular T2s, flares, T2 star. It also applies to both 3D and 2D imaging. So in a very succinct way, it's a comprehensive tool which actually helps in terms of improving your scan time, optimizing your efficiency in the imaging center. The last piece which I wanted to emphasize is that there are other downstream applications, quantitative applications, which a lot of institutions use. For example, Cortex applications like NeuroQuant or other ones. And we have actually shown that our processing, the processed images from SubtleMR is compatible with those applications. So there is no change in the workflow or what is set up in the different imaging centers. And what I would like to do is to show some of the examples. And these are few examples. Obviously, we have a big set of examples and DICOMs, which actually is in the back. But these examples highlight how this particular product works. And you can actually see that what we have showing here is the standard of care image from that particular institution for that particular sequence, on the left, which shows the image quality there. And on the right-hand side is a more optimally acquired acquisition of the same sequence, but processed with SubtleMR. You can actually see that the image quality is exactly the same, while you have actually gained efficiency on the acquisition times here, about 50% basically. So it actually allows you to do that. And that the technique that was used there was denoising. This is another example. It's a 3D T2 flare, a 6-minute acquisition time for what they were using in their institution. We were able to reduce it by 60% and get it down to 3 minutes, almost 3.5 minutes. And you can actually see, but maintain the image quality, which actually is required by the physicians. Again, another set of images. This is in a different clinical area, C-spine, a sagittal T2, and you can again see the same theme where the image quality is maintained, but you are actually providing that efficiency gain here about 60%. And what I would like to, and another one where there is about 50% scan time savings. The emphasis for us is not on individual sequences, but how you affect the whole protocol. Because for an institution to gain efficiency, to actually have an ROI, you have to provide them with the savings on a protocol level, exam level, rather than a series level. So this shows an example. This is an institution where they use a lot of 3D scans, especially neuro brain imaging. And you can actually see the original scan time is about 16 minutes when they actually do these 3D scans. They do 3D for T2, T1, T2 for the post contrast for their SWI scan. And you can actually see when Subtle was applied to this protocol, as we go to the next slide, you can actually see a significant amount of time savings, 44% at an exam level, we were able to actually get for this particular protocol. So, and that is what actually drives the efficiency in an imaging center, where now you can actually change a slot time, which is at maybe 20, 25 minutes to 15 to 20 minutes. So you actually give them an extra slot as we actually provide these efficiencies. And lastly, what I would like to kind of emphasize, this is a neuroradiologist, a heavy talk, but as mentioned before, SubtleMR is applicable to all the different clinical areas. 99% of the clinical areas we are able to actually affect. These are some of the examples in MSK, in prostate, in pelvic imaging, where we can actually produce significant time savings, similar time savings as mentioned before in brain and spine. So it's an extremely useful tool, as we have actually seen, and over the last few years, how it has grown and how it has been clinically accepted in the various imaging centers.
Yeah, those last two slides, I don't even know what those body parts are anymore. I just look at the brains and the spines, but I'll show my colleagues across the hall. They're going to love that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, so now can we talk about what I've been waiting for this first 20 minutes? What is on the horizon? What are some of your new things that are coming out? I know everybody's really anxious to hear what innovative new things, what products you're
Thanks, Wendy. And I want to kind of emphasize, Greg and myself will actually kind of tag team on that. And I, as being a chief product officer for Subtle, we are always looking at this continuous innovation. What things are, how can we take this core technology, which we have actually kind of developed for PET and MR, and apply it either across all the different modalities or within a modality, what can we do? So one of the themes, what we are actually thinking, what we are strategically thinking of is producing workflow solutions, an ecosystem of solutions which affect an entire clinical area. As you can actually see when Greg speaks to, but the theme of this whole development and innovation will be around efficiency, productivity, safety, reduction in dose, and stuff like that, basically. So you can actually see in this chart, we are working hard on creating these workflow solutions across, not only across all modalities, but even within a modality, for example, like MR. What are the different pain points where we, what are the other pain points we can actually kind of address? And Greg will actually kind of allude to some of the specific products which we are actually looking into. But we have a very strong research and development team, which actually is helping us doing all the feasibilities, developing the prototypes. We have multiple SBIR grants, which actually allows us to innovate quickly. And finally, I do want to actually give a shout out to our advisory board, our scientific advisory board, which is really strong and has actually guided us in developing this strategic plan around these new products and along developing a very strong product portfolio. So, Greg, maybe I think you should speak to some of the individual products which we are actually looking into. Oh, before I hand it over to him, I also wanted to kind of mention, a lot of the innovation actually is coming from our internal team. But we cannot do such, take a big step without having a really good partners. We are partnering with industry leaders, Bayer and Siemens and AI Doc, in a lot of these different areas. And these companies are industry leaders, and we are really thankful that we are able to partner with these industry leaders to actually take this technology forward.
Yeah, thanks, Ajit. Yeah, no, I love to talk about new things. And I think the first thing to talk about really is our applications around gadolinium, because we've published a lot in this area. I'm very passionate about this as an application. This is just an example here. Some of the earliest work that we did in deep learning was just demonstrating the ability to use AI to actually enhance the quality of contrast enhanced images. As you know, gadolinium is essential for many of our procedures, yet there's probably a lot of reasons that we would want to reduce the amount or improve the conspicuity of these lesions. And this is just a nice example of a meningioma. On the left, you could see at 100% dose. On the far right, you can see an image that was enhanced with the SubtleGAD software that has trained on many examples of low dose and full dose to actually do the image translation. And I'll point out that not only is the image enhancement of the meningioma quite similar to that of the full dose, but you can see that this software also learns how to denoise the image. So the background is actually also improved. So you have actually better contrast to noise. We're very excited about this. This is fairly mature, but because contrast is actually regulated in the US as a drug, we have had to very closely partner with contrast companies. In particular, we're partnering with Bayer to bring this as a combined software and drug solution to the market. So we're extremely excited about that, and you'll hear more about that coming up. This is just an example showing that this generalizes across different scanners, which is really important. Everyone has a slightly different protocol. This is a Philips scanner. This was done in the sagittal plane. This is a 3D study, of course, and then reconstructed into the axial plane. And you can see the third to the right image being the full dose, and on the far right is the deep learning synthesized from the image in the second row, which doesn't look like it has much contrast at all because it only is done with 10% dose. So we really think that for patients who may need multiple contrast doses over their lifetime, patients with MS, patients maybe with intracranial neoplasms, arterial venous malformations, et cetera, we think this can really reduce the deposition of gadolinium in the brain. And I think that one of the things that's important to us as doctors and radiologists is to always try to minimize impact on the patient's health. So as low as reasonably achievable is not just for radiation dose. I think if we can achieve the image quality on the far right with a lower amount of contrast, it's incumbent upon us to figure out how to do that. This is just, beyond the individual patient. I think we do have to start thinking about the environment. And one of the things that really caught my eye recently was reports not in our literature, but in journals like Marine Pollution Bulletin, which suggests that, the gadolinium that we give to patients, it doesn't just disappear into thin air. It actually ends up in our water supply, and gadolinium is a heavy metal. You can see here some data showing that the amount of gadolinium in wastewater is about 6 times higher than it's been over the last 20 years. And then the graph at the bottom right, I especially like because it shows all of the lanthanide metals. And you could say, well, maybe it's just going up because of industrial use. Maybe, they're all going up. Well, in fact, that one spike going up is just gadolinium. So we're just actually increasing the amount of gadolinium out there. And, we barely know, what the effect of this is on humans. And we haven't really even thought about what it means by releasing this into the ecosystem. So I feel really that more and more we need to think about the whole solution and think about the environment. And it makes me very happy that potentially this can contribute to improving the quality of our water supply. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, and moving more into MRI, one of the things we noticed was that, in a lot of cases, we were very interested in the idea of redundant information in MRI. And the thought is that we acquire a lot of different sequences because they're all quite necessary. But the question kind of arose, could we actually synthesize some of those contrasts from other contrasts that you're going to acquire anyway? And this came to be known within the company as SubtleSynth. And we decided we would focus on spine. We know Wendy really likes spine, and spine is sometimes neglected by neuroradiologists, but spine makes up a huge part of our clinical practice and time on the scanners. And so we decided we would examine whether we could actually produce or synthesize STIR spine images from existing T1 and T2 contrasts. And this is just an example here. On the image on the left was actually acquired. The image on the right was synthesized from a T1 and a T2 that you're going to get anyway. And what I want to emphasize here is that, as most people know, STIR tends to be a relatively low SNR series because you have to knock down the fat signal. If you're actually synthesizing it from two high quality images, the image quality of the STIR actually increases dramatically, as you can see here. I like to think of this as 100% acceleration, if you think of those slides that Ajit showed a few minutes ago, and it actually can lead to higher quality. So if we go on to the next slide, I really like this one, and maybe you could show the other slide panel if you could advance. Acquisition time for this STIR image in this patient with a bone lesion and some trauma as well, almost 4 minutes to acquire that image. And it's a nice image, but if you look at the image on the right, I would say that that's probably an image of higher quality that you would want to read that's more diagnostic. You can even see improvement in the artifact at the bottom from a pedicle screw is improved in a sense. But the thing that's really exciting is the acquisition time in this case, right? You didn't have to acquire it at all. So you save that entire time period. And you can also think about using this technology when a patient has motion and images are unusable. Maybe you could replace it with a synthesized image. So I'm very excited to get into the area of synthetic MR. Pushing it a little bit further, you might say, well, if we can synthesize one thing, a STIR from a T1 and a T2, why can't you go the other way? And this was just some really nice work by some of the scientists just showing that you could use this similar synthetic technology to essentially replace any series that you've acquired by whichever series you have remaining. And this is sort of a complicated slide, but just to describe, the images on the far left panel going down are the actual acquired images. It's actually a brain tumor from the Bratz data set. And then going over to the right, what those numbers mean is that, anytime there's a 1 present, it means that the image was created from baseline images that had that contrast. So you could imagine if you go to the upper far right, that T1 image was created from the T1 GAD, the T2, and the flare. All the images except the T1 were used to create a synthetic T1, which is shown in the upper right. And you can see that as you have more and more sequences to essentially replace the data, the images get better and better. But it's pretty remarkable how well you can do with these technology. And this is actually using a more recent algorithm in AI known as transformers, which have originally been applied to language, but it turns out actually work well for images as well. Another area that we're very excited about, in which we have an SBIR grant, is looking at Subtle for increasing dose for fluoroscopic procedures. And these are just some spine images showing full dose on the far left, and then 4-fold dose reduction using very similar technologies to try to enhance. Of course, now we have to enhance video as opposed to enhancing just static images. But we've spent a lot of work on optimizing and being able to do this at the necessary 30 frames per second. And one thing I would emphasize here is this is an area where it benefits the patient to have lower dose, of course. But the people who are really affected, who do interventional procedures every day, are the operators, because they actually will get a lot of backscattered dose. And they actually, if they get too much dose recorded on their badges, they actually can't do procedures. So this allows them to actually practice more safely as well. So very excited about this area. And then finally, the last topic is, as a part of all of these studies, we've had to develop a suite of tools that allow us to identify image quality, to identify image motion, to decide whether images are good enough to be enhanced. And because of this, we're actually able to develop a more holistic solution that actually leverages this and basically takes the protocol assets being acquired, and then when the images are acquired, we can quantify the image quality. We can quantify the amount of motion, the completeness of protocols to make sure that an entire protocol is done correctly, make sure the entire field of view is on the image, that parts aren't cut off, and to really hopefully reduce not just imaging time, but reduce the disruption to MDs. Those calls that you might get saying, oh, is this good enough? Or should I repeat this study? These are the kind of things that, we're able to actually look at the images directly in real time and do this. And I like to think of it as having a virtual fellow. At Stanford, I have a fellow that can answer the phone calls, but if I was, nonstop trying to read films, I think this would be quite disruptive. The other area that I think it's useful is that, as we bring more and more sites online, some of which are physically distant from the mothership, I think this will allow for more consistent and robust exams across multiple sites with technologists who may not have had the benefit of advanced training. As part of this, of course, this leads to a lot of data that can allow you to monitor the quality of your imaging across the enterprise, and as well as to potentially improve it. For example, to identify sites or technologists that may systemically, have challenges and perhaps direct more training in the right directions. So, this is just kind of an example on the left of a good quality image, on the right, an image that is degraded by motion. And I think Ajit is going to show a little video about how this works in the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. We just wanted to show you an example use case of SubtleQC, as Greg actually mentioned. It actually works in real time. As you can see here, we affect at an exam level. So as each series is coming, the AI is actually doing the quality control check on all the different components, image quality, the extent of anatomical coverage, contrast and stuff like that, basically. And it actually gives you a feedback immediately. So as Greg said, if there are trends from a technologist or a site perspective, this will capture it. This is a second protocol which we try to run in real time. As you can see, each series is coming. The AI is actually checking it and giving a feedback whether those particular components are good or not. And in this case, the T2 flare, the image quality is not good enough. It actually highlights it, and the technologist can then go and rescan it. And so it becomes a virtual fellow sitting next to a technologist, giving them guidance in terms of which ones to actually look carefully at, which ones are really good, and which ones you may need to rescan, basically. So extremely in our perspective, it's a very critical tool and addresses the pain point in between image enhancement and scheduling as the acquisition is going on. So that is the tool.
Wow, I can't wait to see all of these things. And I really appreciate that everything being developed is, with the patient in mind and stewardship of the environment, and you care about me and making my life easier and the text. So that's all really great stuff. Now, what do you think is going to happen in the next few years? You obviously have a plan, or you wouldn't have succeeded so much so far. What's going to happen in the next few years, do you think? Or can you?
I'll start off, I'll give my 2 cents here. I feel really bullish based on the trends we have seen at different conferences, including the ASNR, as well as, how the adoption has gone around the products which we have already in the market. And you can actually see some of the work which we are doing for the future. I really feel bullish that these products will be addressing some of the critical pain points as we go forward. And then this company is set up to actually kind of develop this ecosystem of solutions. Image enhancement is only part of the solution in my mind. As if you look at the whole workflow for a neuro exam or for a spine exam, there are multiple different components where AI deep learning, and technologies like what we are actually developing can really affect and improve. And that is what we are actually kind of working towards. So in 3 to 5 years, we will be at a place where our platform, our applications are providing those workflow solutions, and image enhancement will be part of it, will be a critical part of it, but that will not be the only thing. So I am really, really looking forward, with our advisory boards, with all these conferences, with Greg and how leading company, it's going to be really busy for the company, but I think it'll get good busy.
Yeah. So, my vision long term is to see this on all scanners. I think that this is something that we want to make it so easy to use, so useful to sites that there's absolutely no reason that you would not have this on your system and on your fleet. And I think that means that it will really make a big impact for patient care. And then finally, I want to keep innovating. I really think that there are lots of new and novel applications out there. I mean, if you open any journal or go to any conference, you can see extreme amounts of creativity being shown. And we want to keep listening to people as to, what would be most useful, what would be most impactful, and things that are just going to make everyone's life better. And to me, the real promise of this technology is the flexibility of it and the ability to impact many different areas. So as we go forward, I see this, as a real platform to build on, to allow to deliver all the kinds of advantages in the image acquisition, improvement, workflow optimization space, and probably ultimately the diagnostic space as well, as those tools become more trustworthy over time.
It looks like that's all the time we have for questions. So I really want to thank Greg Zaharchuk and Ajit Shakaranaranian for your experience, your valuable insights, the sneak peek at all the exciting stuff coming up soon from Subtle. If you have additional questions, you in the audience, you can go to Subtle.com's website, or you can email the Subtle team at sales@subtlemedical.com. Also, this webinar, if you want to see it again, show your colleagues, show your friends, is going to be posted on the Subtle website. It's also going to be on the ASNR website soon. Thanks again for joining us. All right, that was a fantastic program, fantastic discussion. Now we get to take some questions. So I think, so Jeet, you are here with us, so
Yep.
You get all of the hard questions.
Yes.
But I'm going to start with the one that is most important to me, since I am here and asking them. So Greg said you all developed SubtleSynth just for me, for the spine. I'm excited about that. Tell me when that's going to be commercially available. I want to get it.
Yeah, we are actually preparing to submit it to FDA, and I think by the end of the year we should have it available commercially.
By the end of the year.
That's the plan. Yeah.
Ooh, nice. Okay. All right. So there's a bunch of stuff here. Let me ask you, so I think this was addressed a little bit, but maybe you can clarify. So a lot of the vendors are developing their own solutions that are maybe kind of similar to this. Yep. So why do people want to use Subtle instead of these other ones that they're developing for their own scanners?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the big vendors have actually kind of looked at this problem in terms of speeding up, optimizing protocols and stuff like that. One thing which we have actually gathered from our going commercially is that a lot of these sites have multiple different types of scanners in their institution, and one of the things is they want solutions which actually is comprehensive from their perspective. That is, it is actually able to affect all those scanners rather than only part of the scanners. And one of the issues I see from the vendor's solution is they can affect their own type of scanners, even within their own type of scanners, some of them. Basically. So us being vendor agnostic is, I think, our biggest advantage from that perspective, that we can actually affect the whole fleet of scanners, whether it's an older 0.3 Tesla Hitachi or a newer 3 Tesla Siemens or GE system, basically. So, and we have multiple different examples for that. Multiple different big institutions are adopting such solutions just because you don't want to have 2, 3, or 4 different solutions for the same problem basically in the institution. So that is one of the biggest advantages for why Subtle has gotten that adoption going.
Well, now, and so, vendor agnostic, but you also talked about a partnership with Siemens. Is that right? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and Siemens, it's a very complementary. They have their own solutions, but what we will actually provide is an added benefit to their products, basically. So we have a very close partnership. We are actually going to be the first application on their Open Recon platform. The idea is that the 2 products which Siemens currently has and SubtleMR, which is not only vendor agnostic, it is also comprehensive from contrast and 2D and 3D planes perspective, basically. So it can be applied to 2D and 3D, it can be applied to multiple different contrasts, multiple different types of sequences. So a very complementary applications, and Siemens was very interested in actually kind of pursuing the partnership for that. So that's how the partnership actually grew, and it will be available on their newer scanners because the Open Recon platform goes on their newer scanners, basically. So
okay, here's another one from the audience, just a little bit switching gears. So was SubtleMR trained with pediatric data, and what pediatric institutions are using Subtle?
Yeah, SubtleMR was trained with pediatric data sets. It does actually have the clearances for being applied to pediatric population. We do have Toronto Sick Kids, which is using Subtle in their clinical workflow. We have a couple of other institutions, Boston Children, where we are actually doing some research work. CHOP in Philadelphia, who's doing a trial with our software. So the pediatric institutions, where I personally believe that some of these value propositions really resonate a lot, are starting to look at solutions like this, basically, which can reduce dose or which can reduce time spent on the scanner, basically, for these pediatric populations. Yeah.
Okay. All right. 2 related, maybe not related. 2 questions about money. 2 questions for you about money. First of all, how much does this cost? I'll ask that one first.
Yeah, and it is the pricing for the software is volume tier based, and if you obviously I think we'll need to know the institution's volume and certain other factors. So if you can actually email to sales@subtlemedical.com, which Wendy you actually mentioned before, with the specific volume numbers, we should be able to give you a quote from that perspective.
Okay. And then one of the other people in the audience said, do you think these AI products will increase the health cost?
I think, as Greg mentioned in his last aspect when he was actually presenting, our hope is that it reduces the health cost, by giving giving that efficiency and productivity and safety features to some of these solutions, basically. So in my opinion, I think a big adoption for solutions like this is going to drive the health cost down rather than up. Obviously, there is going to be an initial cost because we have to do a lot of trialing, a lot of publications to make sure that it is clinically validated, these AI solutions. But once they are actually mainstream, our hope and our thought is that it is going to drive the healthcare costs down.
Okay. So 2 more questions, which might be kind of related a little bit. One of the attendees asks, how does the data get stored? Do we get duplicated set of images? Is it on the cloud or on premises?
That's a very good question. So we don't store any data sets. So what happens is once the data is actually pushed to SubtleVM and to the cloud for processing, if it is a cloud solution, as soon as the data is processed, we actually remove it from the cloud. So there is no storage as such of the data in the cloud. And So the second part of the question was, do we send duplicated series to the PACS, basically? So we do have a system where the users can choose to not send the original faster acquisition data sets, basically. So what happens is once the workflow is set, the PACS will receive only the subtle processed images. So they don't actually see that duplication aspect of it. But during the trial phase, during the pilot phase, some of the physicians do want to see, the different images, basically. How do they look and how's the image quality and stuff like that. So our workflow setting is very, very flexible so that you can actually do that and then switch it off once the physicians are comfortable.
Okay. And then someone wants to know how they can test it at their center.
Yeah, so we do have two ways. We can actually do an online testing. We can do offline testing. Offline meaning that if you give us, data sets, if you want to get that processed, so we, that can also be actually kind of, communicated through the same channel. If you can write to sales@subtlemedical.com. But we do have two options. We can actually kind of do a full live online testing, which does require some of the setups, which Greg actually had mentioned in the talk, or a more easier offline testing, where if you can give us the data sets, we can process it and show the improvement in the image quality.
Okay. All right. And then, so this is interesting. So we have somebody saying, I work with neuroimaging in dementia and wondering if SubtleMR would affect brain voxel-based and surface-based morphometry in any way.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So one of the pieces which we had actually mentioned, where we had actually looked at that, and there is a couple of abstracts and a manuscript which has been published from RadNet, where we looked at a commercial software, NeuroQuant, in conjunction with SubtleMR process data sets. And what we found is the concordance is extremely high in terms of the change in the quantitative measures, basically. So there's very little change in the quantitative measures if you do it with Subtle or if you don't do it with Subtle. So we are pretty confident that some of these downstream applications, especially the quantitative applications, will not be affected by Subtle processing. And we are always looking at publications not only for quantitative volumetry. We are actually looking at other pieces which other softwares which are actually used clinically, and the performance of those software doesn't get affected by the Subtle processing.
Okay. And then this may relate a little bit to what you just said. We have another person saying, does it work with CT and CT contrast, which I think I know the answer to, but the follow-up is interesting. Does your contrast thing mess up the perfusion?
That's a good point. So one of the few areas where we haven't actually tested it and we don't recommend it being used is in the dynamic imaging, where we haven't actually really looked at the perfusion values and quantitative perfusion values with Subtle and without Subtle. And it's a hard experiment to do because we do need both data sets and it is dynamic. So right now we haven't clinically validated that the numbers don't change. So that's the answer for that question. In terms of the CT, no, it is specifically for SubtleMR. And I'm thinking you're actually talking about SubtleGAD. It is specifically around gadolinium. We are actually looking at a CT-based product, but it's in a very, very early stage.
Something else coming. So next time we have one of these webinars, that'll be on your list of the new things coming.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Now, this is ASNR. So we focused on neuro pretty much. You showed a picture of a knee, which I didn't know what it was, but Subtle works with all body parts, right? Anybody, I mean, for the people out there who read something besides neuro, anybody
Absolutely.
can use this, right?
The Subtle is comprehensive from that perspective. It is applicable, as we say, 99% of the clinical exams. The one area which we don't have is cardiac, but we are working towards actually kind of getting the coverage there. But essentially 99% of the clinical exams.
Everything. And so another one that just came up, where says, where are you with SubtleGAD? When will SubtleGAD be available?
Yeah, so SubtleGAD, we are actually working with Bayer, and as you have seen the announcements at the last RSNA on a clinical trial with them, because as I think Greg had actually mentioned, the contrast agents in US is treated as drugs. So our way of actually getting to the market is to work with a really strong partner, and that's what Bayer and us are doing in terms of the clinical trial. So it'll take about year and a half for us to kind of prepare everything for the submission to FDA basically. But as a technical maturity of the product, it is pretty much there basically. And you have seen that from some of the images and all the different publications.
Okay, great. Well, so we're almost out of time. I think we have time for one more question, which gets to be mine. So I kind of, I think I was talking to you all about focus on MRI because most of us at ASNR do not read PET, but some people do. So is there any last thing you want to say about the PET before, in these last few minutes, about subtle PET?
Yeah, and I do want to actually kind of mention that because we didn't talk too much about PET. So, the PET product was the first product which we brought to the market. It is essentially a denoising based product. It actually works for reducing dose or reducing the scan time. And we have multiple different examples of that, on that product. One of the few new things we did with SubtlePET was it is expanded to cover a lot of the new tracers, like the gallium 64. I don't remember the thing. The PSMA, tracers. All of them are compatible with SubtlePET. So, our website has more information around the SubtlePET. So we can actually, you guys can actually check it out. But it is a pretty strong product, at least from our perspective, in the market.
Great, good. All right, and that took us right to the end of our time. So thanks so much for answering those extra questions. And if people have more, they can contact you.
Yeah,
is there?
They can contact. Yeah, absolutely.
They'll contact you in particular. Yes. So we had the email address up there briefly. I don't know if it's up there right now, but go to the Subtle website. They can find you. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. just try to Subtle basically.
Yeah. And so again, for everybody watching, thank you for joining us. And this will be available both on the Subtle website, right? It will be. Yeah. So. And on the ASNR website as well. Absolutely. For anything you missed, or if you want to share this with any of your friends or colleagues. And again, send Ajit any questions to subtle.com. Visit, see what's coming up next. Very exciting work.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yes. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.